On the 10th anniversary of my marriage to Derek, he passed away due to illness. A nurse discovered his diary in the drawer beside his hospital bed. If only Grace were here by my bedside, he had written. It turned out that his so-called commitment to a child-free life was nothing more than an unspoken promise to another woman. He had never considered that I was his wife. I learned about the existence of the diary 2 weeks after a media interview I had given. In that interview, I had shared the story of how Derek and I met, fell in love, and built a life together, as well as my thoughts and insights about marriage. The same interviewer, the same cameras, the same me, but this time with a stinging pain in my heart. The interviewer eagerly cut to the chase, asking me how I felt about the revelations in Derek's diary. The diary was filled with Derek's lifelong, unspoken love for his childhood friend Grace and the poignant promise he had made to her, a promise that defined his entire life. Compared to the words I had spoken in my earlier interview, everything now seemed like a bitter joke. But nothing hurt more than the last sentence in his diary, "If only Grace were here by my bedside." That one sentence ignited a firestorm of public attention against me. I don't remember what I said when I left the recording studio, but Sophie was waiting for me by the door. She was silent. In her eyes, I could see too much pity, guilt, and an unbearable sympathy. I chose to ignore her, bypassing her as I left. Sophie, Derek's adopted daughter, was someone I had poured all my maternal love into raising. Only now did I learn the truth. She was Grace's daughter. Derek had adopted her to fulfill his promise to Grace. Today, Sophie was the one who tricked me into coming here. Sitting in the car on the way back to the office, my driver, Ryan, hesitated before speaking. "Miss Emily, Miss Sophie said she wants to bring Grace back. She also mentioned burying Grace together with Derek." I said nothing, simply staring out the window. Outside the TV station, Sophie stood there, supporting none other than Grace, who was supposed to be receiving medical treatment abroad. Ryan, noticing this, couldn't help but express his indignation on my behalf. What an ungrateful woman. When you were sick, she never once came to see you. Yes, when I was ill, Sophie never cared enough to visit. The diary had stirred up a frenzy, and the media had also unearthed the news of Grace's return to the country. They treated it like a goldmine for attention, plastering the headlines with stories of Grace's return. In front of the cameras, Sophie took Grace to Derek's grave. As the two women, mother and daughter, reunited, they wept dramatically, a scene the media eagerly amplified. Some even edited photos of them together, calling it a divine love story of loyalty and devotion. Meanwhile, I became nothing but a footnote in this narrative. Sophie, determined to push me into a corner, brought Grace and the media directly to my company. Grace, dressed in a hospital gown, knelt before me in front of the cameras. She thanked me for raising Sophie and begged me to agree to have her and Derek buried together. "Emily, I wronged you in the past," she said. "But he and I have already missed out on so much. The media, Sophie, Grace, they all wanted to force my hand." Facing the cameras, I could only maintain the image of the gracious, magnanimous woman I was expected to be. Since Sophie brought you here, what reason would I have to say no? Let everything be done according to what Derek wrote in his diary. I have other matters to attend to. Ryan, please see them out. I tried to drown myself in piles of work to numb my feelings, but no matter how much I completed, I couldn't escape the memories. Those once beautiful recollections now felt like daggers, stabbing me relentlessly. The past played out in my mind like a tormenting slideshow, suffocating me. I thought of the day Derek brought Sophie home. I had asked him why he suddenly wanted a child. What did he say back then? A friend entrusted her to me. I felt sorry for her, so I brought her back. You won't blame me, will you? It wasn't a friend's child, it was Grace's. Derek had adopted Sophie to fulfill a childhood promise to Grace. He once told me he didn't want children because his mother had died during childbirth, and he feared losing me the same way. I believed him, even though I had longed for a child of my own. But in the end, he not only deceived me, but also tricked me into raising Grace's child as my OWN. In the past, I had never doubted Derek's love for me, because he treated everyone with the same warmth and kindness. But in his diary, I saw a love so profoundly deep, yet none of it was for me. Perhaps I hated him, or perhaps I didn't. What I truly hated was myself, for being weak, for being cowardly, for pretending to be strong, for enduring humiliation in silence. I never imagined I would get a second chance. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in my studio. Scattered across the desk were the sketches I had poured my heart and soul into. Upstairs, Derek was resting in the bedroom. The company was in the midst of preparations for going public, and as the head of the company, Derek was deeply involved in every detail. Meanwhile, I was preparing for an upcoming fashion design competition. I had finalized my designs, but recalling everything Derek had done in my previous life, I couldn't help but start revising them. I didn't know how much time had passed when Derek came downstairs. Standing in the doorway, he spoke. "Emily, about the upcoming fashion competition, you shouldn't attend. Grace just got divorced and is penniless. This opportunity is very important to her. The competition was meant to select an outstanding designer to represent our company in a global contest. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Grace had just gained recognition from the world, and since then, collaborations with major companies poured in. Her career as a designer skyrocketed. This wasn't the first time Derek had paved a path for Grace, but it was the first time he had pushed me into an abyss. Looking back, his justification for Grace seemed laughable. In the past, I believed him, tolerated him, endured him again and again. But this time, I wouldn't. I didn't want to. I covered my new sketches without raising my head. This design competition was crucial to me. Derek hadn't expected my refusal. His surprise soon turned into irritation and impatience. "Emily, you're very talented. Opportunities like this will come again. But Grace, she's different. Besides, you have me. I can help you." I could only laugh at his words. Raising my head, I could see the dark circles under my eyes in the reflection. For this competition, I hadn't rested properly for over 2 weeks. I had been running around nonstop, putting everything into it. "Derek, tell me, why is it that just because I'm talented and hardworking, I have to give this opportunity to Grace?" He frowned at me, silent for a moment, then softened his tone as he stepped closer, attempting to embrace me. "Emily, for the fact that she once saved my life, could you let this one go? She saved your life, not mine. Why should I bear the burden of repaying that favor? Haven't I already done enough for her?" I stepped back a few paces, turning my face away. "Let the judges decide on the day of the competition. Instead of convincing me, why don't you help Grace improve during this time? I'm tired. You can leave now." I moved my work to the studio. I didn't say a word to Derek about my new designs. In my previous life, he had given my sketches to Grace, leading to accusations of plagiarism at the competition. I was permanently disqualified, and my reputation in the design world was ruined. In the end, I was forced to switch to finance, living with regret for the rest of my life. After that, Grace's designs lost their spark. Internationally, she only managed to recycle my work, becoming known as a fleeting star in the design world. Beautiful but short-lived. This time, I swore not to let it happen. But I hadn't expected that while I avoided plagiarism, I couldn't escape Derek's schemes. I thought that by keeping my designs hidden from him, I could prevent any accidents. I underestimated Grace and overestimated Derek. They weren't even willing to give me a fair chance to compete. He tricked me into coming home, then confiscated all communication devices and locked me inside. This was how far Derek was willing to go for Grace, so far as to sacrifice my future. I didn't scream or shout. I just sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, quietly waiting until dusk fell. He came home, reeking of alcohol, softly calling my name. "Emily, there will be other opportunities. I'm sorry you had to suffer this time. Let's adopt a child." I clenched my fists, stood up, and turned to look at Derek. I simply stared at him, as if truly seeing the man I had spent over a decade with for the first time. No, I won't. It's true I wanted children, but I wanted my own. I have things to do. I'm leaving. What, was he planning to use a child as compensation? To throw it at me to make up for everything? Derek really was something. Back at the studio, I leaned against the door and slowly slid down to the floor. The calm I had forced when facing Derek crumbled in an instant. I opened my laptop. The slim hope I had shattered completely when I saw Grace's submission for the competition. He had done the same thing as in my last life, handing over my work to her. Back then, when I was accused of plagiarism, I shut myself away for a long time, utterly defeated. It was during that time that Derek brought Sophie back to live with me. The child, though difficult, helped me slowly recover and face life again. But this time, there was no scandal. I had merely lost a competition. It wouldn't kill me. I still had my talent, and my reputation wasn't destroyed like before. There had to be another way. The next day, I met with the organizer, Matthew, my college mentor. He was a design prodigy, someone I had admired since college. Now, he was one of the most renowned designers in the country. The rain poured heavily outside as he sat across from me, holding a cup of coffee. The steam obscured his expression. "You missed the competition," he said. "Since getting married, you don't seem as passionate about design as you were in college." How could I not love it? I forced a bitter smile, adding 2 cubes of sugar to my cup. It's my lifelong dream. I placed my new sketches and design concepts in front of him. These are my latest works. The same themes, but created from 2 completely different states of mind. The latter better aligns with the competition's theme. "Your designs are innovative," he acknowledged. "But you've already lost your eligibility by missing the competition." My heart sank as I gripped the handle of my cup, staring into Matthew's deep eyes. Then, unexpectedly, he added, "After the semifinals, there will be a revival round. Be there on time. The judges would want to see your work." He didn't linger, leaving his coffee unfinished as he stepped into the rain with his umbrella. Watching his retreating figure, I was reminded of the shining beacon he had been during my college days. "Emily, you're no less talented than I am. Given time, you'll be a rising star in the design world. I may not shine in others' eyes, but I can be the star of my own life." The revival round was just around the corner. Derek still brought that child home. Or perhaps he never really respected my feelings. Grace stayed in the background the entire time, letting Derek handle everything for her. Such a grand love. Derek, wearing an apron and holding a rattle in his hand, knelt by the couch, entertaining the baby. He radiated a paternal glow I had never seen before. It was as if he had transformed into a completely different man compared to the one who told me he didn't want children. In fact, he seemed even more attentive than in our previous life. I stood at the entrance, watching for a while, then slammed my bag onto the table. He was deftly changing the baby's diaper with a skill that astounded me. His care for the baby was clearly because it was Grace's child. When he noticed I had returned, he quickly introduced the baby. "This is Sophie, the child I adopted. The paperwork isn't finalized yet. Could you help change her diaper? I need to make her a bottle. She's hungry." Not a single word about the baby's origins. It was as though he had decided I wouldn't ask or refuse. After all, I had once longed for a child. But he was mistaken. I was no longer the person I used to be. "No," I said coldly. "I've never taken care of a baby before. How would I know how to change a diaper?" In our previous life, I had been so good to this child, but what good had it done me? I caught a flicker of surprise on Derek's face, but he quickly composed himself, likely thinking I was just throwing a tantrum. I ignored him, my expression icy, and said, "By the way, I have a business trip coming up. I won't be staying home. I'm only here to pack my bags." "A business trip?" He frowned as he finished changing the baby's diaper. "You're not competing anymore, so why the trip?" I didn't bother replying. Instead, I went into the bedroom, packed my luggage, and left without looking back. Their love should not be built upon the ruins of my design career. I don't know where Derek sent the child, but he still showed up at the revival round of the competition today. Sitting in the audience, he was right next to Grace. The two of them were pointing at something on a tablet, whispering to each other. Well, it made sense. Contestants who advanced to the finals were invited to watch. The workshop was stifling after hours of work, but it was finally time to present the results. On stage, as I introduced my design concept, my gaze unintentionally met Derek's. I saw shock and anger in his eyes. I understood why he looked at me that way, and I understood why Grace, sitting beside him, was pale as a ghost. Just as I understood why I was smiling so brightly on stage. As expected, I earned a score of 95, securing a spot to return to the competition. I had made it through the revival round. After the competition, Derek quickly found me and grabbed my wrist tightly. "You promised." I yanked my arm free and interrupted him. "I never promised anything. I didn't promise to quit competing before, and I certainly didn't promise to help anyone raise a child now." With that, I turned and left without looking back. I would never be anyone's stepping stone again, not in love, not in my career. Before I could leave the venue, I bumped into Matthew, who had come looking for me. "The professor wants to see you," he said. I noticed his gaze shift toward Derek behind me. Turning around, I saw Grace had also followed me. Derek wasn't looking at me, though. He was comforting her. It seemed all the anger he had shown me earlier was fake. The tenderness he showed Grace was real. I didn't linger. I followed Matthew out. The professor Matthew mentioned was our shared mentor and Grace's mentor as well. Back in college, he had high hopes for me. I never expected to marry so young and gradually step away from the design world. In our previous life, when I was falsely accused of plagiarism, the professor had stood firmly by my side. But I had disappointed him, unable to recover from the blow. This time, the professor still had high hopes for me. On the day of the finals, the venue was filled with talented contestants from across the country. Grace didn't look well. With the drafts Derek had stolen from me, she should have been one of the top contenders here. What more could she possibly be worried about? It wasn't until I received a text message just before turning in my phone that I understood. "Derek, go easy on Grace." It wasn't easy for her to make it to the finals. And was it easy for me to make it to the finals? Not only did I have to create new drafts from scratch, but I also had to guard against my own husband. I turned off my phone, handed it in, and stepped into my battlefield. During the material selection phase, I ran into Grace again. She kept glancing at me, her lips twitching like she wanted to say something but couldn't. It was irritating to watch. But here, there was no Derek to interpret for her. No one cared. The theme of the finals was light. The quotation marks around the word reminded me of my bleak past life. If only I had been resilient, brave enough to follow my heart and confront the reality of being unloved, I could have emerged stronger, like a dazzling beam of light breaking through the cocoon. With that concept in mind, I poured my heart and soul into my design. For 2/3 of the competition, I stayed in the workshop. As the countdown began, I was still putting the finishing touches on my dress. One by one, I carefully sewed tiny crystal beads onto the hem, each bead representing a glimmering moment in life. As expected, my design won first place. The accolades poured in, and I secured an opportunity to study and compete abroad. Grace, with the designs Derek had stolen from me, naturally placed in the top 3. From the stage, I saw Derek in the audience holding the baby, waiting for Grace. From afar, they looked like a perfect little family. I lowered my gaze, avoided the reporters eager for interviews, and quietly left the venue with my phone in hand. Back at home, I packed up the last of my belongings and moved back into my studio. I mailed the divorce papers to Derek, but before I could settle down, Matthew called me. "The professor wants to throw you a celebration party. I've sent the location to your phone. Come quickly, don't keep the professor waiting." Look at that, my senior is even here to celebrate for me, whereas Derek only has eyes for Grace. When I arrived, I realized it wasn't just the professor. Many of our former classmates were there too. Among them, Derek and Grace were sitting together, holding her baby, a sight that was particularly jarring. "Emily, come here. You're the only one we're waiting for," someone called out. At that moment, Derek also noticed me. His smile faltered slightly, the ease on his face vanishing. I took the only available seat, next to Matthew. "Emily, you're a star now. That dress design was stunning." "Yeah, Emily, your designs have become so creative over the years." "Emily, before you leave for your overseas trip, can we get a closer look at that dress?" Their enthusiastic chatter washed away much of the sadness I had felt earlier. Unable to resist, I had a few drinks and soon my face was burning hot. I felt a searing gaze on me and looked up to find it was Grace. Her eyes carried a smugness I couldn't quite understand. "Emily, why are you ignoring people?" came Derek's irritating voice from beside me. "What?" I retorted, annoyed. "I've been busy responding to my junior's warm greetings. When did I ignore anyone?" Perhaps my impatience showed because his tone softened. "Just now, Grace congratulated you, but you didn't respond." His words instantly silenced the table. Those who knew about my history with Derek exchanged curious glances, clearly relishing the drama. Their stares snapped me out of my intoxication. "You're drunk, Derek," Grace interjected with a false air of concern, not once looking at me. Her apologetic expression seemed sincere, but I had no interest in exposing her. One of the juniors, however, couldn't hold back. "Grace, didn't you get married? Why isn't your husband here today?" Grace's hand, which had been patting her baby, froze. When she looked up, her eyes glistened with tears, feigning vulnerability as though the junior had said something cruel. "My husband and I divorced some time ago. It's just me and the baby now," she replied softly. The junior rolled her eyes and shot a glance at Derek, who was holding the baby. "Per Emily, though. She's the one who's really had it rough." Anyone who didn't know better would think Grace had remarried and brought her family along. Her words were sharp and left no room for misinterpretation. Grace, unfazed, took the baby from Derek's arms and smiled faintly. "There's no such thing. Derek and I are just friends, close business partners." I watched as Derek's expression turned ashen. His hand, reaching to take the baby back, hung awkwardly in midair. Grace loved herself more than anything. Her words were just a way to protect her reputation. Derek's gaze shifted to me. I raised my glass to him across the table with a slight smirk. This time, I wouldn't be waiting for him. After the party, Derek was supposed to pick me up, but instead, he took Grace home because she got drunk. By the time he returned, Matthew had already dropped me off at my studio. Derek sat in his car, looking at me with a mix of hesitation and longing. "You're staying here now?" he asked. I unfastened my seatbelt and rubbed my temples. Yes, it's not appropriate to stay at the old place anymore, now that we're getting divorced. Matthew, who was aware of my relationship with Derek, had looked uncomfortable during the dinner. Now, as he drove, his tone carried a hint of reassurance. "Take some time to relax. Don't let this affect your performance in the competition." "I'm thinking the same thing," I replied. The professor even wrote me a recommendation letter for the studio there. It's better to go early and be prepared. The next day, I packed my bags and boarded a plane to the design capital. To my surprise, Matthew was on the same flight. "Senior, why are you here too?" I asked. "The professor heard about your divorce and was worried, so he asked me to come along and look after you. Besides, I have some business to take care of there." I had a hunch about Matthew's intentions, but didn't dare to confirm it. Despite telling myself to stay strong and independent, my past experiences had turned me into a cautious turtle, retreating into my shell when it came to love. I didn't trust that anyone could truly love me or that I deserved it. After landing, I quickly left, avoiding Matthew's burning gaze behind me. Over the next few days, aside from meeting with professors, I stayed holed up in my hotel room, adjusting to the time difference and sleeping endlessly. Matthew didn't disturb me. The competition day arrived before I knew it, and to my surprise, I ran into Grace there. Matthew explained, Derek invested a lot of money to secure a spot for her. Actually, Matthew continued, the professor wanted to ask you something. Did Grace use one of your designs? I marveled at the professor's sharp eye but didn't know how to explain. Should I admit that my husband had stolen my designs for his childhood sweetheart? Or that I was locked up at home and missed the competition because of him? Either way, it hurt my pride. I simply smiled, waved at Matthew, and walked into the design room. In life, whether it was my past life or this one, I had never stopped striving upward. I had just taken a wrong turn along the way. This scenario was beyond my expectations. It was entirely different from my past life, but now I've chosen to embark on a new journey, just as I once resolutely walked towards him. This time, I'll step forward with the same determination. The draft was completed almost effortlessly. When I went out to gather materials, I ran into Grace again. It was clear that, once more, she intended to use my design work. All I could do was wish her luck. The winner of the first prize is Emily from the East. Congratulations, Emily. The crowd erupted in applause. But then, the host gestured for silence. During the competition, we received a report detailing evidence of plagiarism by Grace during both the semifinals and the finals. According to the rules, all her results are hereby annulled, and she is banned from competing for life. With that, Grace's design career was effectively over. The moment I held the trophy, it felt as if my soul had ascended to a higher plane. What I hadn't anticipated was Derek confronting me the moment he heard the news. Emily, I didn't expect this from you. Were you the one who reported Grace? Do you realize you've ruined her entire life? He demanded. I looked at him calmly, neither sad nor angry. So, he knew that such an action could destroy someone's life. He just didn't care what happened to me. All he ever cared about was Grace. Fortunately, I had long since given up on him. And what about me, Derek? When you handed her my designs, did you ever consider what it would do to me? His self-righteous indignation faltered, and his momentum dwindled. His lips moved for a moment before he finally muttered, I'm sorry, Emily. I'll make it up to you. I'll treat you well from now on. Can we not get divorced? I turned my face away, unwilling to look at his repugnant expression. I know you love Grace. You can't let her go. I've already moved out of the house. Since you've already seen the divorce papers, just sign them and go to her. I hope when you're lying sick in bed, she'll be the one by your side. That way, your wish from your last life, written at the end of your journal, can finally be fulfilled. After that, I declined Matthew's invitation and left the place filled with childhood memories. I went abroad to clear my mind. While traveling, I heard the news that Derek and Grace had gotten married. I couldn't understand how Derek could justify it to himself after hearing what Grace had said. I admired his courage but despised his actions. Later, I learned that the person who reported Grace was a junior from the celebration party that night who had a bone to pick with her. During this time, Matthew frequently messaged me. Every time I updated my social media, he was the first to like and comment, sharing snippets of his life in return. Even though I often responded in my head, but not in reality, he would still find time to visit wherever I was. Occasionally, I would draw something and send it to him. Whether it was beautiful or not, he always praised it. This dynamic of mutual attention and care was something I had never experienced with Derek. In Matthew's eyes, it seemed that simply standing there made me a shining star. I realized I was someone who deserved to be cherished. 3 days after I returned home, I heard that Derek was gravely ill. What could have caused his decline in just 3 short years? I didn't know. But I heard that, while the start of his marriage with Grace had been fine, things quickly turned chaotic. Around the same time, Grace sought me out. I wasn't keen on meeting her, but she blocked the entrance to my studio, a 3-year-old toddler by her side. The little boy was far from well-behaved, his tantrums lasting hours on end. Derek's poor health must have left most of the child-rearing to Grace. However, judging by her rosy complexion, she must have hired a nanny. "Miss Grace, what do you need?" I asked, not wanting to waste words on her. "I just want to ask you one thing. Did you know that Derek gave me your designs back then?" I frowned, not understanding why she was bringing this up now. Does it matter whether I knew or not? Grace tugged at the corners of her mouth, her gaze carrying something I couldn't quite decipher. "I see. Derek probably doesn't have much time left. If you have the chance, please don't visit him." "Visit him? I'll never see him again in this lifetime." I stepped around her and saw Matthew standing there, holding a bouquet of roses. The vibrant red of the roses was as fiery as the sunset on the horizon, mirroring the new life I was just beginning to embrace. I got married. Everything about the wedding was perfect. I felt like a real-life princess. I was so grateful to Matthew for encouraging me and helping me pursue the things I loved. From the wedding dress to the decorations, Matthew had taken care of it all. He never let me suffer, not even for a moment. At that moment, I was so happy I could cry. I couldn't help but think of my wedding to Derek. Back then, he had insisted on a small ceremony, claiming he disliked large gatherings. Despite his wealth, the wedding had been modest and lackluster. The regret I had felt then was now replaced by the love Matthew had poured into every detail. That day, Matthew told me that Derek's illness was quite severe. I was a bit surprised. He hadn't deteriorated this quickly in my past life. But now I didn't care. Seeing Matthew's nervous expression, I couldn't help but laugh. "I have good news for you," I said. "You're going to be a dad." Matthew was overjoyed. He picked me up and spun me around, his excitement lighting up his entire face. Seeing him like this, I couldn't help but blush. You should know, in my previous life, Derek and I barely had a married life due to his decision to remain child-free. But Matthew was different. Because he loved me, during my pregnancy, this atheist of a man would visit churches and chapels, praying for the safety of our child. Inspired by him, I also visited a chapel and drew a lot. Was I sincere in my prayers? I wasn't sure. Having been given a second chance at life, I couldn't help but feel a bit more reverent. I drew a lot, but I couldn't understand the words on it. However, 3 words stood out clearly: top fortune. I handed it to the priest for interpretation. He looked visibly shocked and said, "Miss, your fate is unusual but extremely fortunate. You'll undoubtedly achieve what you wish for." After that, he took the lot, closed his eyes, and said no more. I smiled. These places always have a way of saying pleasant things. While not necessarily true, it was comforting to hear. Not long after, my child was born. He was a child born out of love. As I looked at the sleeping baby beside me and at Matthew, who was busy nearby, I thought, this life feels complete. Asterisk, asterisk, Derek's epilogue, asterisk, asterisk, I'm dying. But before my death, I seemed to have a dream. In the dream, I had a soulmate, a lover, and a child. Life was perfect, except for my poor health. Beyond that, I couldn't have been happier. Then, I dreamt of my death. I and the dream. I watched Emily face an interview with poise and grace. She spoke about our memories, warm and full of happiness. Even without a mirror, I imagined the same content smile on my face that she wore. Soon, the scene shifted. Reporters still surrounded Emily, but their tone became aggressive. I noticed her expression, painful and distressed. Their words pierced my ears like daggers, making my heart ache for her. I realized my personal diary had been leaked by a nurse. I was furious. How could someone entrusted with patient care expose such private matters? It was unprofessional and cruel. Sophie's calculated decisions, coupled with the relentless media, crushed Emily's dignity into dust, trampling over it without hesitation. At that moment, my thoughts didn't drift to Grace at all. All I wanted was to rush forward, hold my wife in my arms, and tell her I love you. But dreams don't always align with our desires. Nothing changed. Maybe heaven took pity on me as the scene shifted again. This time, it was from years ago when I handed Emily's designs to Grace. That's when I noticed the sadness in Grace's eyes. I remembered how much she once loved design, seeing it as her life's passion before meeting me. The scene transitioned to Emily standing center stage, accepting an award. She was breathtaking in a custom red gown, holding the trophy high. As for Grace, she likely remained discontent. I had married her, but our wedding lacked the joy I had imagined. It paled in comparison to the wedding I had with Emily. From excitement to mutual resentment, it happened so quickly. Or perhaps, during my time with Emily, I had been enveloped by her passionate love, falling for her in ways I hadn't realized, but ultimately, I was the one who hurt Emily. I let her down. That fervent love she once had for me would never belong to me again. Asterisk, asterisk, Matthew's epilogue, asterisk, asterisk, I saw Emily's name on the competition list. Both my mentor and I were eager to see her work. Unexpectedly, she didn't show up for the contest. She loved design so much, I thought she'd never miss it. In Grace's work, I saw traces of Emily's style. I wanted to confront Grace, but had no evidence, so I let it go. I was a bit disappointed, but the next day, Emily came to see me. She seemed different, more mature, a little weathered. Derek and Grace's actions were well known in the industry. It was hard not to know. But telling Emily about them wouldn't help. After all, she loved Derek deeply and had sacrificed so much for him. I pretended to test her with a stern demeanor, but she pulled out a brand new design draft. The concept was ingenious and delightful. I tried to hide my excitement, ensuring my face revealed nothing. Following my mentor's instructions, I told her there was a wild card round. If she seized this opportunity, a comeback was possible. She did it. She won beautifully. Later, she divorced Derek. I was thrilled. I thought, maybe I had a chance. But progress with her was slow. She had been hurt in that marriage, and it was natural for her to have reservations about love. Still, I loved her and had the patience to help her through this period. Everything was going smoothly until Grace showed up during the final competition. But it didn't matter. I believed in Emily's talent. Grace was exposed for plagiarism. Her entry was revealed to be stolen, and everyone in the industry knew about it. Her reputation was ruined. I watched Emily climb step by step, inching closer to her dreams. I was genuinely happy for her. I could see her attitude toward me shifting little by little. Finally, she agreed to marry me. Later, I heard Derek had married Grace. Rumor had it their marriage wasn't going well. The next news I heard about Derek was that he was gravely ill. I told Emily about it. She had no reaction, which secretly delighted me. But she must have seen through me because she shared another piece of news. She was pregnant. Hearing this, at that moment, it felt as though my heart had stopped beating, and every cell in my body was cheering, radiating joy. I had lit candles and prayed fervently, hoping only for her good health. Once, a priest called out to me and said that the happiness in this life was something I had begged for. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. He simply smiled and said nothing more. But after I got home, I had a dream. In the dream, Emily was scolded to the point of falling into depression, and she eventually took her own life. I dreamed that I had once been like a pilgrim, bowing step by step, pleading for Emily's happiness. Whether it was something I begged for or fought for, I realized that only by cherishing it was I truly worthy of having it.